Okay, we're live. Welcome, everyone. This is Bill Bronchick, the host of the Creative Real Estate Financing group on Facebook and youtube.com/Bronchick if you're watching on YouTube. I have a special guest that I invited on who is a colleague, an old friend, and a really nice guy and has great information to share. Very, very experienced at creative finance and Sub2. And he also hosts a great forum that's like twice the size of mine and inspired me to do this group called Sub2 Investing in Creative Real Estate Finance. You could find that on Facebook. And then I'll give you another link where you can get more information about William Tingle. And I invited him on strictly for the purposes of talking about some of his great deals. And that's what I think is going to be the theme of this weekly guest thing. And congratulations, my first guest.
Oh, thanks,
William.
I'm honored.
So, you were the first one I had in mind to get you on and talk about, just talk about for a half hour, some of your greatest deals that you've done, how you did them, how you found them, what the story was, and, what troubles you ran into and how you overcame them and so forth. And folks who have questions, you could certainly post them in the comments section right there, and then we'll answer questions when we have time towards the end, or maybe in the middle. We'll take a few questions as we go. All right. So, tell me what one of your first. Let's hear your first deal.
My very first deal, gosh. Okay. Actually, it was right after I'd learned about Sub2 and bought your course. I've got to start out by saying, Bill says some awfully nice things about me, but I wouldn't be sitting here in Sierra Vista, Arizona in the 7th month of mine and my wife's epic road trip if it weren't for Bill Bronchick, because he taught me some fantastic techniques that I've used and just made my own in some of the ways that we do things. But without him, I definitely wouldn't be. I'd still be flipping burgers somewhere. So thanks to you, Bill, for that. You changed my life.
Well, thank you for the kind words, William. We all know, hey, it takes it. You can only lead a fish to water, or a horse to water, so to speak. Is
right.
The expression goes, and you swam across the big river and did it yourself and hustled, and you deserve the credit. So thank you for the kind words.
All right, great. So my first deal was actually not long after I learned about Sub2. I used these things that you'll hear all over aren't good anymore, but I still find them to be effective. Bandit Signs. We put out some Bandit Signs. I remember very clearly I was driving home one evening and a guy called me up. I answered my phone and he said, "Hey, I saw your sign out here in Sub-South, says you buy houses." I said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "Well, I've got a house that I need to get rid of. My wife and I bought it last year. We're getting a divorce and neither one of us can afford the payments individually. And I really need to sell it." And so I turned around, took the next exit, got back on, drove out to the guy's house, had my briefcase on me next, with the copies of the forms straight out of your course, had not had them reviewed. I mean, typical every newbie mistake in the world, right? Got out to the guy's house. There's not a stick of furniture in it. There's a mattress on the floor in the master bedroom, a telephone sitting in the living room floor, nothing else in the house. And he tells me his story. We're getting a divorce. Our parents gifted us the down payment. The house is like brand new. And I said, "Okay, so, what do you owe?" And he told me, and I knew about what houses were worth because I had lived there in the year previous. I really just fumbled through it because I was brand new. And I said, "Well, I think that we can probably put your house in a land trust and we'll assign some beneficial interest and we'll do this." I told him way too much. And every time I would take a breath, he'd say, "Sounds good to me. Sounds good to me. Sounds good to me." So we pulled out all the documents, and I think the guy actually helped me. "Well, I think I signed here." He really helped me fill them out. But we got that deal done. We closed on the house. We didn't give him a dime. We took over the payments, sold it 2 weeks later on a land contract. Our buyers gave us $13,000 down. Remember, we got zero in this. The payments are current. And we collected a couple $100 a month in cash flow for about 18 months. They refinanced, and we made, I think, $27,000 off a house that someone just gave us. I'm telling you, man, I was hooked. I said, this Sub2 thing is the way to go.
Yeah,
So
it
that's what
really
we
is.
focused
It
on.
really is. It really is. So that's great. And so these people, they called off a bandit sign.
They called off a bandit sign. That's right.
Okay, those don't work.
No, they don't work. Everywhere you go, you see them.
Yeah, I've experimented with bandit signs, and if you say, we buy houses, I want to be real specific and not field 100 calls. So I put out a bandit sign once that says cash for keys, weekly overpayments. And people will call me up and go, what kind of keys do you buy? I have these old brass ones. And
we have seen some interesting bandit signs on our trip. We've seen, of course, cash for cars. We saw something, Joe, do you remember what it was? Something I can't believe. Well, of course, there's cash for diabetic test strips now.
Yeah,
there's everything out there. Well, we saw one that was, I hadn't seen, I can't remember what it was, but I said, I can't believe they're doing bandit signs for that now, but they'll buy anything. And I guess if you can flip it and make money, it works.
Yeah,
So,
bandit signs, if you do them consistently and right, they're called bandit signs for a reason, obviously.
Right.
They're not legal in a lot of jurisdictions. And the question is what is the penalty? And if you can't do the time, don't do the crime, so to speak.
Right.
So if you get a fine every 6 months for $100, who cares? But if it's a misdemeanor, or they're going to put you in cuffs, don't do that. Don't do that.
She just remembered it was I Buy Diamonds.
I buy diamonds.
Right.
Interesting. Yeah. That's an interesting one. All right. I'll trade houses for diamonds. So
really, there you go.
All right. So tell me about some other deals. What was some of the other ones that come to mind that were some of your better deals and how you found them? And
I'll tell you this. I actually did a podcast with a lady yesterday that's going to be out soon, where it's hard to find sellers and heirs and those types of things. And it reminds me of a deal that I did. I don't know. It was several years ago, but I had been driving by this house ever since I got started in real estate, and the house was empty, and I never could find the seller or the owner. I knew that someone owned it. I had their name. I'd done a little bit of research, but I just never could track them down. Well, finally, I got access to some skip trace software. I think at the time it was Accurate. And that was a big deal then. And so found the guy immediately. This was when I lived in Macon. He lived in Atlanta. I just called him up and said, hey, tell me about this house down here on Guyton Street. What's the deal? What's going on? He said, oh, I don't even own that house anymore. The bank owns it. And so I knew different because I'd been to the courthouse and I had seen, who was on title. So I got him to tell me the story. The house had been his mom's. And you know, Bill, as well as I do, the deal is always in the story. The more complicated the story, the more, moving parts to it, you're hearing something that's going to be a good deal for you. Right. So this guy says, well, it was my mom's house and she got older. And so I bought it from her when she went into assisted living. And I lived there for a couple of years, had a kitchen fire. It wasn't major, but the insurance company screwed me. They wouldn't pay. So I said, you know what? Y'all can just have this house. And I just moved. So the house has been sitting empty for, 5 years, right? And he said, I'm sure the bank's already taken it back. I mean, I had seen during this time the grass got taller and taller. There are actually trees in the front yard now. And like I said, I knew he owned it. So I said, I'll tell you what, I said, do you want to try to do anything? Do you want the house? He said, absolutely not. I've moved on. I said, well, I tell you what, I said, I don't know what's really going on with this thing, but would you give me a quitclaim deed for $100? And he said, sure. He drove down one day, a few days later when he was in the area. We actually got everything signed on the hood of my truck. Okay? And so I wrote him a check for $100. Then I got on the phone. I knew, I had ownership of the house. Now I just had to find out what was going on with it. Right. I had already walked through the house. I knew it probably needed less than $10,000. It was just the fire department did more damage to the house than the fire did, putting it out. Right. So with the water damage. So it needed carpet, it needed paint, it needed some repairs in the kitchen. We're talking about a $65,000 house. I mean, this wasn't a mansion, but it was in a good rental neighborhood. So I found out that the loan had been sold. Bank of America owned it. So I got on the phone and started calling and finally tracked down some department in New York that was responsible and could answer questions about a mortgage. And I said, listen, I said, I'm down here I painted myself as a title searcher. Okay. I said, listen, we're down here trying to complete a transaction on a property. You guys are showing as owners of record. We're trying to clear this title situation up. Can you tell me if you guys are still the lender and if there's a balance owed? Now, the seller, the homeowner says, he doesn't think there's a balance owed, whatever. She said, I can't find, she said, give me the owner's name, give me the address. She said, I can't find it in our system. But we'll put it over to the research department. We'll either contact you within the next 2 weeks with a payoff amount or a satisfaction of mortgage. Now, my calculation was that there was about $45,000 owed on this house. And I want you to know, in 2 weeks, they sent me a satisfaction of mortgage.
Wow.
So I got this house. It's free and clear. We spent about 10 grand on it and had a house in brand new condition that we got for $100, basically.
Well, wait a minute. I've got a question. So did he really pay it off or they just screwed up?
No, they screwed up. You know how it works. I mean, these guys buy loans in multi-million or billion-dollar packages, and things fall through the cracks.
Right. So it was just those, they couldn't find the file because a bank went out of business or another one buys it. And you see that a lot with like banks that went under in 2008, where the FDIC comes in. And takes the banks over. The government takes it, and a lot of them shredded files, didn't keep good records, and that's interesting. That's interesting.
And I love deals like that. I mean, they're fun because what you'll find, and you've been doing this a really long time. After a while, they become sort of routine, the typical cookie cutter thing. I find that once the negotiation's done, a seller gives you the house or you make the deal, you buy it, I lose interest. Okay. Because the rest is just a process, finding a buyer, putting them in the house, doing these things that anybody can do for you. But deals like this are a lot of fun.
Right. They can be. And, and it also weeds out competition because you get brokers, title companies, attorneys, buyers, other investors going, it's unsolvable. Right. I love hearing that.
Listen, you talk about something. If you want to hear about a deal, I'm talking about some recent stuff. I've got a student in our Sub2 Max group that she joined the group and she came on one of the coaching calls. We were talking about going after expired listings. Okay. And her name's Carla. She is a great example of massive imperfect action. We talk about that all the time. And you and I both have students that have been students for years and haven't bought a house. But it's great when these people come in and they just hear a little bit and they just run with it. And so she said, okay, expired listings. She jumped on PropStream. She searched expired listings for like 3 years back. Right. And so she calls one of them, and the guy had owned the house there in North Carolina where she's at. He had moved several states away. He had listed it for sale. The listing expired. He moved on, rented it to a family member. Come to find out, again, the story tells the tale, makes the deal. They had an offer and got to the closing table, and the title company said, listen, there's a problem here. And we're not going to be able to close. You know what the problem was, Bill? The problem was the previous 2 mortgages on this property that had been each satisfied at sale. No one had recorded the satisfaction. So there were 2 open deeds of trust on this property. Now, you would think a title company would say, okay, here's what we need to do to get this problem solved. But instead they went, there's a problem, we can't close. So the buyer went away. The guy had to move on. He transferred for a job and he just rented it because he couldn't make the mortgage payment and his new payment where he was. When he agreed to sign this house over to Carla, and then she came back to me with this problem, he said, well, the problem's very simple. You've got HUDs where these things were, funds were collected to pay these off, go back to these companies, remind them that in a lot of states, there are damages for failure to record that satisfaction. And it's per diem.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you know within a couple of weeks, she had her satisfactions and she flipped that house and made $38,000 on
Nice.
a deal that couldn't get done,
Right.
right? Because somebody had to know how to fix it, but the title company either wasn't willing to do it or you're dealing with an hourly employee that just didn't have the knowledge to.
Right. Yeah. We have a question here from one of our Facebook folks.
Sure.
If a bank owns the property, how is the quitclaim deed valid from the previous owner? I think they missed something there.
Okay.
Well, the bank, he thought the bank owned it, but he really.
He thought the bank had foreclosed on it because so much time had gone on. But in reality, the bank had not foreclosed. They hadn't taken any action because they didn't even know that it was in their portfolio and that the guy wasn't paying.
Right.
So it was just in limbo.
In some states, Colorado used to be one of them, not anymore, but the owner had a redemption period after the sale to pay it back. So you could get a deed from a owner after a sale, and as the new owner redeeming the foreclosure or tax sale or whatever it may be. Like in Texas, for example, they foreclose properties for back taxes instead of liens, selling liens. So there, you have I think a 6 months or a year to go back and say, oh, here's the tax money plus the penalties and interest. Give me my house back. So you can actually get a deed from someone after a foreclosure during the redemption period if your state has one.
Right.
Yeah, and in Colorado, we used to have 75 days redemption, or was it 90? I don't even remember at this point. It was so long ago. I think it was 90, 75 or 90, whatever it is. And nothing happened until the redemption. Like 3 days before the end of redemption, everyone was fighting over the deed to redeem. So sale was like, formality.
Yeah, and some states have a lengthy redemption period. Alabama, for example, they've got a year.
Like a year, yeah.
Yeah, that the bank is pretty much in limbo. They can't do anything really. They just have to wait it out. But yeah, that's a great tip. You can approach people who have just written a house off because a lot of homeowners. Listen, and I know you do this too. You run into homeowners; they don't even know the terms of their mortgage. Right. They don't know their interest rate. No. We talked to a seller a couple of weeks ago that bought a house 18 years ago. He's been in forbearance for 18 months for COVID, and he's trying to get things going. It's with Wells Fargo, and Wells Fargo, man, they're one of the worst. They're like, pay us in full. We're not going to put it on the back end of the note. Pay us in full or give us a deed. And I've heard that several times about this forbearance stuff. So he's scrambling around trying to figure out what to do, sell the house or do whatever. Right. And he just found out that he's been paying interest only for 18 years. He didn't know.
Right. Wow. That's amazing. Okay. Let's talk about another deal.
Okay. There's one deal that I'll talk about as an example for something a lot of investors don't know. And that is we bought a very nice house actually the owners had won a lottery, not the multi-million, but a substantial ticket that there was a couple $100,000. So they went out and they bought this house and they paid cash for it. And I think they paid about $100,000. It was a nice place. This was in Georgia. And what happened was over time, these people got into some trouble. They got on drugs and other things. They were looking for quick cash to sell this house. During all of this time, they had a brand new truck repossessed and some other things. And so from the equity appearance, there wasn't a ton. Even though they had paid for the house free and clear, they had like a $40,000 truck lien and a $15,000 credit card lien and some other things. If you're smart enough to know your lien laws in your state, and for example, in the state of Georgia, a lien's only good for 7 years. And you also know that if you get a lien from, say, Ford Motor Credit, the chances of it being renewed are very low, almost non-existent. Right. They go through the process, they get a judgment against you, the attorney files the paperwork, and then it's forgotten. And it's the same way with credit cards as well. Now, they can renew it, but the chances of that are very slim. I actually bought that house for $20,000 cash, okay, knowing that the liens would fall off, and then just held it until that happened. So what happens is if you're willing to wait, you can have another use for the house, whether it's a rental or whatever, the liens out. And a lot of investors, especially new ones, don't understand. When you're buying subject to, especially, you can buy it subject to all kinds of liens.
Yeah.
And if you don't have to make an immediate exit, you can just wait them out. And that creates a ton of equity for you, a couple of years, a few years down the road.
Yeah, like IRS liens. People don't realize IRS liens are first in time, first in right, just like every other judgment or mortgage. So they don't have any special priority in the process. For example, if it's a $100,000 house and there's a $90,000 first mortgage and the IRS puts a $60,000 lien on there, they're just going to let it sit. They're not going to force the issue because there's no equity. And
Right.
if you took subject to the first and just left the IRS lien in place and don't pay it, it's not your obligation. You didn't accrue the taxes.
Right.
At some point, you may have to, if you want to refi or sell it, you're going to have to negotiate a deal with the IRS. But the longer it sits there, even though the more it accrues interest, the more likely you can settle it.
Mhm.
So things like that, people don't realize. Yeah, great.
Right.
Fantastic. All right. So we got a little bit of time left. There's a story that you told me once at when we were having steak at Ruth's Chris here in Denver when you were in town, and I was on the floor howling. It was the funniest story I've ever heard. You know the one I'm talking about, right?
Right. I do. That's the oh my story.
The oh my story.
I'll tell you, and again, this is, not the sexiest deal in the world, but something I always tell students is if you're making an offer, especially a cash offer, that offer needs to be so low that it embarrasses you to make it.
Yeah, you're gonna wince when you make it.
What have you got to lose? I mean, the worst thing that can happen is they say no. If you don't make the offer, you may as well be getting a no anyway.
Right.
And I'll tell you, if they say yes to my offer too quickly, I always immediately feel like I paid too much. So this particular case was we had a lady call us, and I don't remember how she found us. It may have been from our ad in the paper. It may have been from a Bandit Signs. Somebody may have referred us. By that time, we'd been operating for quite a while. But she called us up, and she lived out of state. She was a little older. I believe she was probably in her 60s, late 60s. Mm-hmm. The story was her dad had been a realtor in Warner Robins, Georgia during the 40s, 50s. And of course, Warner Robins is a military town. So a lot of people coming in and leaving. And with most VAs, they'll come in, they'll buy a house, they put nothing down, they finance they roll the finance charges in, they owe more than the house is worth, they get transferred. What do? So they call a realtor. Realtor comes out, says it's going to cost you $5,000 or $10,000 to sell it, and they go, I don't have that. What can I do? And the realtor, who's also an investor, goes, well, hey, let me tell you, we may have a solution for you. And that's what this guy did for dozens and dozens of houses in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and bought just tons of houses. So he left his houses to his daughter. Over the years, she had sold them off as she had gotten older and she was out of state. She was tired of dealing with it. Mm-hmm. She had one last house left, and the tenants had just moved out. She had a property management company handling it. And she said, I need to sell it. And I said, well, what are you thinking that you want to get for it? And she said, I don't know, about probably $30,000. And I said, well, I can tell you based on the neighborhood, I probably am not going to be willing to pay $30,000. Should I come look anyway? She said, absolutely. She said, by the way, can you help us with some directions? This lady didn't even know where this house was. Okay. So I said, sure. And I said, you guys meet me at a location that she was familiar with, and I'll let you follow. So they pull up in their Lincoln Continental, right? These people got money. And she follows me to this rental house that she's probably never seen. And it was a typical $60,000, 3-bedroom, 1-bath, shoebox, carport rental house that had been a rental for years. You know what I'm talking about. It maintained by a management company. Mm-hmm. So we're walking through the house, and the carpet's stained and the walls need painting. And she's just every time. And I make sure I learned that from Lonnie Scruggs. You point little things out just in sort of, oh, look at that. And she's like, oh my. Every time I'd point something out, she's like, oh my. You could just tell she thought that house was just the biggest slum in the world. And she was horrified at the fact that she had owned this and had this as a rental. And so we walk outside, and a little windowsill has a little rod on it. And I'm like, oh, look at that. And she's like, oh my. Oh my. And so this has been going on for about 15 minutes, right? And every time she says, oh my, the price drops $5,000. Because you know what I'm getting at. So finally we're standing outside and she says, well, what do you think? Are you still interested? And I said, well, ma'am, to be honest with you, it's in pretty bad shape. And I had to turn away from her, really. I mean, this was a real test. I had to turn away from her because remember, this house is worth 60 grand.
Right.
And it needs paint, carpet, a little bit of, just touches here and there. I mean, really, you're talking about 10, 15 grand tops. Right. And I just turned away from her and I said, probably the best I could do. And I can't even say it now without grinning. I said, it was about $3,000. And she's like, oh my goodness. And she looks at her husband and says, what do you think, honey? And he said, it's your house. And she goes, I guess we'll take it.
Oh,
so we buy a house for $3,000. We drop, I don't know, 12 in it, maybe, getting in really good shape. And I flipped it to a rental guy for, I think, 40, 45. And he got a good deal on it. And he's got a nice little rental property, and I made $30,000. So,
awesome.
Make the offer.
Right. That's the Wayne Gretzky rule. Every shot you make is a potential goal. You miss every shot you don't take. It's the same thing. Every offer you don't make doesn't get accepted. That's a cardinal rule. And what you said earlier was great. If you don't wince when you make it, and if you're not almost laughing to yourself, it's like a Saturday Night Live skit where you're trying to not laugh.
Mm-hmm. I mean, they don't have to say. Obviously, this woman didn't need the money. You know what I mean? She just wanted it gone. Mm-hmm. So, and that's really the key. And that's what you should be listening to when you're talking. Even now, I mean, we don't do the low end stuff anymore. I mean, our typical deal now is a $250,000, $300,000 house that they owe $280,000 on, or whatever. I mean, it's very low equity, no equity, VA loans, things like that. They're very nice houses, but still, I'm going to ask, we can start making the payments for you, but that's probably about all we can do. And if they're motivated, they'll say, okay, and they'll let you do it. So just don't be afraid to make the offer.
Right. We have a question here from someone on Facebook. How do you determine how much equity a seller has? He has another technical question, but let's get to the simple one.
Well, equity is really, there's perceived equity and there's actual equity. Okay. Let's take the example of the most common deals that we look at today. Let's say the house is worth 300, they owe 280. The perceived equity there is $20,000. But by the time you factor in cost to sell, if they list it with a realtor for 300 at 7% commission, they're going to pay 21,000 to the agent.
Right.
Okay.
No
already they owe 301.
Right. He froze there for a second, but when he comes back, there you go. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess y'all lost me. But perceived equity in that deal is 20,000. Actual is negative. So really, it's just no.
Oh, we got a little glitch on the connection here for a second, but I think
when the value of the property and backing out. There we go.
There we go. Well,
good old internet.
Good old internet. All right. Thank you for sharing today, William. Thank you for being my first guest on this hopefully weekly presentation on people sharing their best deals to get people to understand A, how they work, B, that they really do work, and to inspire people to go out and take action and make this happen.
Do it.
And so you'll see a link there at the bottom there. You can join William at $7coaching.com. He also has a Facebook group called Sub2 and Creative Finance, which is a lot bigger than mine and some really good stuff. I'm envious because William spends a lot of time and a lot of energy and on his group compared to what I do. So I'm going to try to spend more time with the members in our group as well and get it to something that would be as awesome as yours. So thank you, William. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks for joining. and click on the link below there, $7coaching.com, and you can check out more information about what William has to offer. Take care, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.